Good evening and welcome to Answers for Life. I'm so glad that you have tuned in tonight. You know, we try to cover subjects that is of interest to you, and some of you write in, you let me know what your questions are, and let me just encourage you. If you have a subject that you'd like discussed on this program, if you'll write me, the address is right there on your screen. It's Levon Young at 337 Farmington Road, Summerville, South Carolina, 29483. If you write me and give me an idea of what you would like a subject, we'll be glad to address it. If I don't know too much about it, I'll do some research and I'll try to find some answers. You know, years ago when I taught school, I would have a student come up and they'd ask me a question. And I'd say, if I give you the answer, that's too easy. You go look it up and bring it back tomorrow and I'll let you know whether you're right or not. Now, you know what I did, give myself a chance to go find the answer. So when we have Answers for Life, I don't want you to think I sit here thinking I'm the wisest person that can answer everything that comes along. But you know, Einstein made the statement one time, it's not what you commit to memory that's knowledge. He said, knowing where to find the answers. And you know, when we know where to find the answer, that's valuable. And there are several ways that we know where the answer is. One, we know the answer is in our relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. And Answers for Life is not just philosophical or not just some political answer, but I can assure you that the answers that we give to you are biblically based and have to do with the fulfillment of what God has said and what God has promised. Now tonight, we're going to be discussing a subject that we don't like, even God hates. Matter of fact, God said He never intended it to be something that would be common among people. He brought it about for the relief of just unbearable conditions. And He outlined some of those conditions, but it's a subject that I'll guarantee you are associated with. Either you or close friends of yours have been involved in divorce. Divorce is a subject that, you know, years ago when I was a teenager, that was back when the dinosaurs still roamed the earth, about, you know, the early 50s when things were calm. You heard people talk about back in I was a teenager in the early 50s, and life then was, you know, young people today. Young people are no different today than they were then. We talk about the differences in young people. No. You know what we did as teenagers? What we could get away with. What are teenagers doing today? What they can get away with. So it's not teenagers that's changed. It's the parental control. And then there is another thing that's happened. Now, divorce has always been here. Divorce goes all the way back to the through the Bible to the right. I don't know that Adam and Eve ever got a divorce. I don't guess they did, but their children did. I'm sure at least they killed each other anyway. And but divorce has always been something that has been involved in our society. But there has been an explosion of divorce since the 60s. And I think we all know some tremendous things that happened in the 60s. There was a revolution of individuality, of freedom, what was termed freedom, but it was freedom from restrictions, freedom from identification. You know, when the revolution of sexuality took place in the 60s, how many of us ever thought then that we would be arguing today over what bathroom you could use in public? I mean, we see the progression of the way things have happened. But divorce is something that we're all familiar with. Now, I grew up in a family, my dad and mom celebrated their 65th wedding anniversary just before my dad passed away. And he was in good health. Matter of fact, my dad preached on a Sunday, went to the hospital on a Wednesday, and died on a Saturday. So my mom and dad set a stage for what marriage was all about. And I'm from a family of 10 children. And my baby sister had been married for over 40 years when my dad died, or right at 40 years. And we never had a separation or divorce in the 10 children. And I think one of the reasons for that was we were taught the very foundation of what marriage is all about. It's not utopia. It's not the answer for everything. but it was designed by God to bring comfort, to bring blessings. And my wife and I will be celebrating 57 years, right, in the next month or so. And divorce is just something we don't even think about. It's not in our vocabulary. But yet, I'm a marriage counselor, so I deal with divorce all the time. I deal with divorce on almost a daily basis, in all stages of divorce. Some, they're fussing and fighting, and they're thinking about divorce. Others, I deal with it when they've already gotten a lawyer and they've gone to a judge and got legal separation, and then through the divorce process. And I will admit to you, I have conflict of my own mind and my own spirit many times when I'm dealing with this, because on one side of me, you know, when most comes to me and they want divorce, it's usually, if you went down to the courthouse and found out why most divorces took place, it would be adultery. But I'll submit to you that's probably the least reason for divorce. What happens is the marriage goes south, they're not happy, they're not communicating, they're not getting along. And then finally, one of them gets fed up and goes out and has an affair, and the other, oh, now I can get my divorce. Because I can go to the court, and on the grounds of adultery, I can get a divorce just like that. And so that's used to get divorces. The common thread is, I said, why do you want a divorce? Well, we just don't love each other anymore. We're not in love. Well, that's the reason I've never accepted. I've never thought that was a valid attitude because of several things. Love is a choice. Love is a decision. If you base your love on emotions, you're in for a roller coaster ride. I've got the most beautiful, wonderful wife in the world, but I don't wake every morning and say, oh, I'm so in love with her. Sometimes I want to get out of here. I mean, you're human. Sometimes I don't even like me. Sometimes I have an argument with myself. I told one guy the other day, I said, do you ever get aggravated with yourself? He said, well, yes. I said, do you ever feel like bending yourself down and giving yourself a good swift kick? He said, sure. I said, why don't you give your wife the same privilege? That's okay. But then when we talk about in love, well, I've said enough for myself. I want to introduce my guest because I'm excited about the guest that we have. She is very trained, educated, experienced in the area of dealing with all stages of divorce. And I want to let her just share with you some of the things, but I want you to meet with me, and I want to introduce her. She's with the Transformation Through Divorce, and it's Debbie Martinez. Debbie, it's so good to have you.
Thank
I've been
you.
looking forward
Thank
to
you.
your
I'm
being
so
here.
grateful to be here, really.
And you know, we speak out of life's experience, and you were sharing with me you had the unfortunate experience of going through divorce yourself.
Right.
And that's one of the things that propelled you into doing the work that you do now. Why don't you share with the people basically, first of all, what your ministry is and what you do through this ministry?
Well, what I try to convey to them is divorce does not define you. You define yourself. And even though you go through the darkest times, for me, and I was sharing with you earlier, I could not have gotten through this without my faith, hands down. Never expected it. It broadsided me, broadsided my children. But without my faith and the strength of the Lord, I never could have gotten through this. And I encourage people to really lean on God. And it grew my faith. Mm-hmm. You know, some of the trials and the struggles that we go through and the obstacles, it grows our faith in the Lord. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is I help people just navigate the entire process. I help them with mediation. I can help them division of assets. How are you going to co-parent? How are you going to get past the anger and the bitterment if there's infidelity? You have to think of your children. You can't put them in the middle. And I see that so much where the children now are used as pawns and they didn't ask for this. If you are the mom and you've been a stay-at-home mom and you have to go back to work, what is your passion? How can we turn that passion into a viable job for you? How are you going to get back out into the workforce? How are you going to get your self-esteem back? How are you going to date as a 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old divorced person with a family? So I work on all of these issues with all of my clients.
You know, Debbie, years ago, and I've been in ministry a long time, and there is 4 levels I think we can look at divorce, and from the religious perspective, from the church. One is no divorce, no circumstances of divorce. The other is infidelity, therefore the mate is free to be married, but then the remarriage is restricted. The third one is divorce but no remarriage. And the fourth is just divorce and marriage. I think religion has been a major emphasis in this, and when we first started this in a church setting, it was almost nil. But we've seen that transformation take place through the church to where I know in my denomination that I'm in, I was one of the first churches that defied the rules of the church and allowed divorced and remarried people to join and be a part of the church. And I got in some trouble with my officials because I even put them in places of leadership in the church, which was contrary to the general principles. But that aside, the revolution, what do you think caused, because now the divorce rate in churches among Christians is almost the same, if not even a little higher, as it is in secular or outside the church. What do you think has produced that switch? And that has definitely been a change in the last 25 years.
You mean the increase in divorce?
Yeah, the increase that among Christians is just as prevalent now. The divorce rate among Christians is just as high as it is among
I think it speaks to what you just spoke of. You know, I grew up where that was just not accepted. I mean, you just didn't even think about it, and you would sleep in separate rooms, and you could live the rest of your life unhappily married, but you just did not get divorced. But as time has moved on, it has become more accepted.
Yeah.
And for people who are very involved in the church, I know in the church that I grew up in, there were no divorced people in that church. And now that it's more accepted, people feel that they don't have to leave their church. They can be with their church family and still be part of the church. So I think it speaks to what you said, that the church is more accepting of it. The congregation is more accepting.
You know, when people come to me for marriage counseling, many times they'll say, well, I don't know, I just think I married the wrong person. And a lot of times they'll look at me and I say, no, it's not that you married the wrong person, you're doing the wrong things. You're not following the rules of marriage. But then again, it takes 2 people with the same goals to make a good marriage work.
You have to be pushing on the same mountain at the same time.
Address that issue.
You know, and I think there's also discrepancies with age, because now I see people who are a lot younger and, oh, I can get married. They don't take it seriously. If it doesn't work out, we can get divorced. They don't take it as a vow. They just take it as something I'm going to do on a Saturday night, and if by Monday it's not working out, I can get divorced. And I wasn't raised that way. I mean, and I have to say I did come from a divorced family. But to me, being married it's a vow, and you take that vow. And people don't work on it. They don't take it seriously. And I just see now with the younger generation, it's like, it's no big deal if we get divorced. We get married, we get divorced, it's not working out. They don't work at it, they don't communicate. The first little blip on the screen, they're ready to go have an affair, or they're ready to see an attorney, instead of sitting down and saying, okay, you know, we entered into this. And people don't think about what they're entering into, quite frankly, I don't think. They don't really give it a lot of thought.
Well, you know, I got into Christian counseling before Christian counseling was recognized. And, you know, back in the 70s, early 70s, mid 70s, most Christian counselors was just ministers or Christian workers that felt the need, and they were not trained academically to be licensed and qualified as counselors. And so therefore, the opinion of Christian counseling was kind of in the basement. and it was not recognized. We still struggle as Christian counselors. We still struggle sometimes with the court systems, DSS, and especially if you're in a church setting like this, because, oh, he's a church counselor. He's not qualified to do regular counseling. And but yet, when I got into it, I think I kind of self-analyzed it in the 90s and turn of the century, that most of the counselors were being educated in the institutions that they taught Rogerian, which is basically, if it feels good, it's okay. That whatever, in other words, if your conscience don't bother you and it feels good to you, then it can't be wrong. You know, even what was it, a country and western song? How can it be wrong if it feels so good?
Right.
And but that philosophy invaded the counseling process, and I think even in colleges where they were educated, I know for a while I could sit down with a counselor, and if they were educated in North and South Carolina or Virginia, and I got to talking to them, I could tell you what school they graduated from, because I knew the philosophy of the counseling that they were taught in those areas. But I think the Rogerian, the Skinnerian, the Freudian, you know, the Freudian, everything is psychosexual, so therefore sexuality is the base of all relationship. And, you know, the response to stimuli, all this, I think we fed into the minds of the young people.
Well, what it does is it gives people justification to do what they want to do, whether it's right or not. You know, oh, if it feels good, how can this be so wrong? If I'm married, but oh my gosh, I'm over here with Susie Q and this feels so good, then this has to be right. Yeah. And so it gives people a way to justify their behavior instead of stepping back and looking at their own morals and their values, which I think we've lost.
Well, I know you deal more with people who've already kind of made up their mind they're going to get a divorce.
Right.
And they've already gone through, most of them I'm sure has probably already got separation, and they're working through how they're going to go through this. And I guess you could say I'm more in the preventative end, where they come to me when they're still fighting and fussing. Matter of fact, I tell people, they say, when do you think you can save marriages? I said, when they come to me when they're still fighting and fussing, you can usually save those. Because the fact that they're really angry with each other shows they still care. But I said, when they reach the point to where
they're not
they won't even talk, they don't even want to talk about it, they want to discuss it, and I'm going to send them, they need your help more so than. But I know on the preventative end, you know, I deal with the basics of what marriage is all about. Matter of fact, I basically go back and take the same thing that I do with premarital counseling. And I take them, I said, let's start at the beginning. You didn't get premarital counseling, so let's get it now. I don't care if you've been married 10 years, 20 years, 30. And you know, I'm having people come to me that's been married 40 and 50 years.
But marriage is like a relationship. And any relationship, whether it's friends, your children, co-workers, it's a relationship, meaning it's a growing process. You have to keep communicating. You just can't become stagnant. And so after 40, 50 years, you know, they need to come in and they need this counseling and they need the coaching and they need to know, you know, get back into the basics of a relationship and the communication.
All right, let's say here's a couple, they've already gone, they got legal separation. They own a home, couple of cars, they got a 401k, they got, let's say, 2 children that are still minors or under 18. But they've already been to me, and I said, I think too much water's under the bridge. I don't see how you 2 people is going to make it unless you really just get on your knees before God, turn it over to God, and learn how to love each other. But they've already got the separation, and they're coming to you. I want you to look into that camera and tell them what they can do, because they're going to come to you. What is the benefit of their coming to you? What are they going to get out of coming to you? They're already separated. They've already got separation papers. They're working through custody. They're working through all assets. They're looking at the dollar marks. They're just thinking, you know, they're both hurt, even though one's guilty and the other might not be guilty. But just Because there's probably some people right now that's looking at this program, and they're right there at that point, frustrated. They got a lawyer wanting another $5,000 to help them settle all this, and both of them's got lawyers. They're spending $8,000 to $10,000, $15,000. They're arguing about it. They're not getting anywhere, and they're talking to me, and I say, listen, I want you to go to Debbie Martinez. So now they've come into your office. Look at them and tell them what they can expect.
Well, I'm going to tell you one thing. I grew up with the slogan, what would Jesus do? And if you come into my office, and as Christians we sit there, and I say to you, how would Jesus handle this divorce? And that is with respect, with faith, with compassion, taking into consideration you have children, communication, all of that is so important. How are you going to write the script now for your children down the road and for yourselves? You want to walk out of this marriage with respect and your head held high. And I will help them navigate all of that, keep the communication lines going. If someone's angry, let's work through that anger. It's not about going always into the court system. A lot of this can be rectified at a simple table, as you know, because you do mediation. And to me, that's the best way to do it. Why start out your new life being combative? Life is too short, you know? I mean, let's start our new chapters in our new lives. You know, okay, we're not married anymore, but we have children. We had 20, 30 years together. Those are good memories. You know, let's move forward and not carry all that old baggage with us.
That's right. Listen, I've got 2 little booklets that I'd like to send to you this week. And it's right in line with what Debbie is talking about. One is Healing the Wounds of Divorce, and the other one is Helping a Child Deal with Divorce. All right, let's take those 2 things and talk about them. Healing the wounds of divorce. You've been through it. Mm-hmm. I'm glad I didn't have to go through it. I'm glad, you know, it's like I told someone. Too. I told someone the other day, I've never drank any alcoholic beverages, so I didn't have to get delivered from alcohol. My wife is the only woman I've ever had sex with, so I didn't have to get delivered from being immoral. I've never smoked a cigarette, so I didn't have to get delivered. I've never done all those things that make great preachers. But then on the other hand, I'm glad I never had to get deliverance from that. And I don't think I have to have experienced it to tell a person, right, you know, it's joyful. Now, other things that I had to deal with, everybody has their skeletons and everybody has their dealings. But matter of fact, I told someone I was saved when I was 6 years old. And one day the startling realization hit me, LaVon, all the sins you committed since you got saved. And that don't seem right. But yet, the reality of it, but healing the wounds of divorce. What is the basic element of getting those wounds healed? Because they're deep.
They're very deep. They're very deep. And 2 things. I work with my clients straight off the bat. Acceptance. You have to accept what happened. Take your part in the responsibility for it. Accept where you are. It might not be where you planned to be at the moment, but you have to accept where you are so that you can start healing and moving forward. And then the other thing is perspective. You have to change the way you look at divorce. You have to change the way that you look at your life. Perspective is everything, absolutely everything. And I always give them the example of the 2 men sitting in the sand, where there's 2 men sitting on a beach and they're eating tuna and little frankfurts out of a can, and one guy's complaining and he says, I can't believe that I'm sitting here in the sand eating this tuna and these frankfurts. And the other guy says, well, I don't know where you're sitting. He says, but I'm having surf and turf with an ocean view. And to me, that just sums up the way you need to look at life, and divorce is part of life. And it's all about perspective.
One of the things that, and you mentioned this, I think, that is so important, is taking ownership. Now, sometimes we refer to the innocent party. Usually that is when there's been infidelity, and we look at the one that did not have an affair versus the one that did have an affair. And I remember a few years ago in my denomination, we were releasing the restrictions on divorce and remarried. And they said the innocent party. Well, I immediately, the little righteous indignation stood up for me, and I said, no. I said, listen, I don't think we're opening the door for too much division if we say innocent party. I think when a divorce happens, there's guilt that both parties has to deal with. Am I right or wrong?
I think the majority of the time there is, and it's in varying degrees. Mm-hmm. But let's say, for example, you're married to someone with narcissistic personality disorder. I mean, you could be the best husband or the best wife, but if you're dealing with a narcissistic person, there's not a whole lot that you can do there. So in cases like that, I think there might be an innocent party, but it's, you know, there's always responsibility. Always, you know, right. Did I try to communicate enough? Did I try to meet their needs? Did I get so wrapped up in myself and the children that I forgot about my husband? So there's always responsibility to be taken, and for yourself, for your own personal growth.
Could you stay over and be with me next week?
Sure, I would love to.
Because I got some more questions I just want to ask you, and some discussions on that. But just one last thing before we finish tonight's program. When we are dealing with that finality, the divorce is going to go through. There's trauma. I don't care what the reason. There's trauma that's connected with that. What is the advice that you give to the one that's hurting the greatest? Usually there's one that's hurting more than the other.
A couple of things. Patience. You have to have patience with yourself and patience with the process. And as a Christian, excuse me, you have to turn to your faith. Good. Hands down. And that's where you're going to get your strength, is in your faith.
Amen. Thank you for that, Debbie. And listen, she will be joining me next week. But in the meantime, if you're down to that point, maybe there's been infidelity, maybe it's just incompatibility, maybe it's just someone like Debbie mentioned, just so narcissistic you can't even talk with them because their head's so far up in the clouds until they don't see the reality of life. And then there's, you know, people who just have no care. I deal with, you know, I sit at my table and I deal with people who make $300,000 or $400,000 a year. I deal with people who make $12,000 a year. And did you know the stress is the same? It's just that the figures are different. Whatever you're going through, God knows about it, and He'll help you get through it. Now, we're going to talk, be sure and join us next week, because Debbie's going to be with us next week, and we're going to continue talking about divorce, because 5.5 out of over half of every marriages end in divorce. That is an astronomical amount. But join us next week. Thank you for being with us tonight, and join us again. We'll be talking about this subject. God bless you.